Um, but what I'll do is as if I had just introduced you, and then I the way I envision this is, I like women meet at a cocktail party
Yeah.
or at a dinner party and realize that even though they do completely different things, that they have these parallel experiences because
Yes.
it tends to be more of a male dominated field. So I want it to feel like a conversation
Yep.
and not overly stiff. I'll ask questions for prompts,
Sure.
but we can just let it flow. And I'll ask you a little bit about your childhood, how you grew up, and kind of
Great.
how you chose your career and sort of your path to that.
Okay.
Um, and then I'll ask you before we begin, what percentage of women do you think are in your role as a
Well,
whole?
so it's very few, and I will tell
Hmm.
you that I did look up because the statistics seem to change depending on where you're looking, just like politics or
Yeah,
anything else. But
right.
if you look at sort of the most recent research, the numbers saw that in 2019, of the
Hmm.
250 top grossing films or films that had distribution in some capacity,
Hmm.
13% were directors that were women. So,
Okay.
and these were definitely not the highest grossing movies or the movies that
Okay.
sort of propel women forward. They're not the Marvels, they're
Right.
not the action flicks, they're not those movies that women are trusted with necessarily. And
Hmm.
that's horrible,
Hmm.
but that I do think is the conceit
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. That's a good figure to have in mind.
Yeah.
And then I'll just ask you about obstacles, challenges, how you overcame them, advice to other women who either want to try to get into the field or and do what you do, or even just advice to women in general in male dominated fields. Um, I am definitely going to ask about Apache 8 because like that is so fascinating to me. And I need to talk to one of those women.
Oh, there,
That
and
would be
it's,
amazing.
yeah, it's a great doc. It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can talk to you about the filmmaker who made it because I worked with her, and I'm still really close
Cool.
to her. I worked with her for years and years. Yeah,
Oh, great. Cool.
yeah.
Cool. And then at the end, if we haven't already, then I'll say if you had one piece of advice for a woman who wants to be in a male dominated field or is in a male dominated field, what it would be. And then I'll wrap up with just if listeners want to find out how to learn more about you or what you're up to, where they should look online.
Okay,
Does that
great.
sound good?
That sounds great.
Okay. All right. And then like there's editing and all that, as you know. And so,
Yep.
if you want to say something, anything differently, or if I mess up, then I'll start over.
Okay, yeah.
And we'll just roll with it.
That's all great.
Good. Okay, cool. All right, we'll pause for a second. Hi, Vicky. It's so nice to have you on today.
Hi, Nancy. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
And I am so excited. I told our listeners a little bit about your background. And as we were chatting a little bit before we got started officially, it's sometimes hard to encapsulate everything somebody does in a couple of seconds. So that was sort of the highlight reel, if you will, or I guess in your industry terms, sizzle reel, right?
Yep, yep, that's right.
Of your career. But I'd like to know a little bit more just about you and kind of what your childhood and your upbringing was like and how you ended up going from point A to point B in your career.
Sure. Well, I am actually an immigrant. I immigrated here from Ireland with my family in the 80s when I
Mhm.
was 12 years old. So I've just probably aged. I've just told everybody my age, which I'm not actually worried about. I mean, I'm just happy to be alive, so I'm not worried about my age. If my mom was here, she would be dying that I gave you any indication of what decade I'm in. But we immigrated here in the 80s. There was sort of a mass exodus from Ireland during that period because of recession, and it was sort of the second biggest exodus from Ireland, the first obviously being the potato famine. Um, and we were part of that because my mom was a citizen. She had worked in New York City in the 60s as a nurse, and that was not an unusual profession, obviously, for an Irish woman back in the
Mhm.
days, and still. Um, and so we came to Texas, which was a little bit unusual, but my parents thought, why not here. And I had this sort of, glorious upbringing in Ireland, in the south of Ireland, in County Cork, and then moved to the hottest place in all of the world, as far as we were concerned, as little Irish kids coming with our lily white skin to, like the suburbs of Houston. But I came here and it was a really strange, wild experience. And I feel like it made us sort of what we are today. All the kids there, I have a brother and 2 younger sisters, so there's 4 kids. And my dad and mom were in their mid 40s and started over completely. Had nothing when we got here, and built a life for all of us. And it really made us into it built character. It did all the things that it's supposed to do when you uproot your teenage children and bring them to another country. So I feel very lucky, and I feel very American, to be honest. So yeah, so that's how I came to be in America. And then went to, obviously, middle school, or what we used to call junior high here, and high
Mm-hmm.
school, and went to the University of Texas, went to the film school there, and graduated, moved to New York City, and wanted to be a filmmaker. And I didn't start immediately in filmmaking and production. Production was it's always been hard to get into, but then it was particularly hard because basically you had to my joke is, and it's not really that much of a joke, you had to have wealth to be a production assistant, because you were not being paid anything. So you had to have
Mm-hmm.
10 jobs or actually be, independently wealthy. So I just actually went to work for a production company that did B-roll videos for Pepsi companies, which we did all the behind the scenes of the Super Bowl ads and all that stuff. It was really a fun job. And then I went into film distribution and stayed in that for years and years. And then decided at some point late in the game, after about 12 years of film distribution, that I wanted to go to the creative side and make films. And so that's how I ended up pushing into that. So I've been making films for about, it's close to 10 years I've been making films. So
Mm-hmm.
and it's a lot harder than the business side, I'm going to tell you. It's
Yeah.
not you think so much when you're a film distributor, because you're putting movies into movie theaters, and you're making trailers, and you're doing all the marketing, and you think, God, these filmmakers are so annoying. They're just like telling us what they think they need, want from their film, and how to sell their film. And I thought, gosh, if I can distribute as well as I can, I was doing it pretty well. I was like, if I can do this, then I can definitely be a filmmaker. Oh my gosh, it's so much harder. And so, so being on the other side of that, of the business, is really eye-opening, to say the least. So
And so when you pivoted, was there ever a point when you got into the creative side where you said, "Oh my God, what the hell am I doing here?"
yes, yeah, I'm still saying it. I said it this
Okay.
morning. Yes, for sure. You're a kind of a lone wolf in it. When you're working on the business side, you're in an office. Everyone seems to be making money, because you're working with sort of a machine that is like, movie theaters and the digital on demand platforms. So there's some kind of security in that. But when you go out and become sort of an artist and a writer and a creative, you really are dependent upon your own drive and what you're willing to you know give up and not give up. And so
Mhm.
you know, I have lost a lot of shame on the creative side. So I will ask anybody for anything. I will work. I am the one thing I can take great pride in is I may not be the smartest person in the room, but I am definitely the hardest worker. And I can stay up longer than anybody else can, and I can figure stuff out faster because I've had so much practice in my
Yep.
life. I that is the one abiding truth about succeeding, is that if you're a hard worker, you can make it happen. So I think that's been the you're working 5 times as hard on the creative side,
Mhm.
just trying to get not only the creative, like the writing and the producing and the directing done, but also trying to get the project into the world and like get somebody to buy it. The sales, it's endless. It's so
Yeah.
endless.
It's so
Yeah.
multifaceted, it
Oh my
sounds
gosh.
like.
Yeah.
And you bring up an interesting point about just kind of putting in the blood, sweat, and tears. And in my conversations with other women, we have talked about the importance and the necessity of hard work. And sometimes, in a male-dominated field, working harder than the guys to kind of prove your status, prove your worth and your ability. But have you ever come across the idea that sometimes the hard work alone isn't enough just by pure virtue of you being a woman? What and
Yeah.
how have you dealt with that?
Well, I think if hard work were enough and we could be seen as, if there was somebody looking at us equitably, then women would be in a much higher percentage of positions across the film industry.
Mhm.
You know, for lack of a better term, and I don't think I need one because I think this pretty much explains it. There is a boys network and a good old boys sort of network in every business, right? In every sort of world that exists. And so it's sort of, there does come a point where it sort of doesn't matter how hard you work. It does depend on who you know and who's willing to give you a break. And if that isn't a man, you have to hope it's a woman. And if it's not a woman, then you are just out of luck and you have to figure out another way in. So, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've sat around with girlfriends who are in the business who, we'll sit, and it's really frustrating, to be honest. And we can only do it a little bit because we could sit there and complain for hours on end about how, you were up for something and they wanted a man instead because they think a man will understand the sensibility of the characters better. And that's so asinine to me because it actually happened to me sort of recently. It's not true, but somewhere along the way, a producer, whether it's a man or a woman, believes that and trusts a man can do it better. I don't know how you fight that except for just keep trying.
Right.
It's completely disheartening. It's completely, it does make you want to quit sometimes, but it
Mhm.
also kind of gives, I have said to my husband a few times in many recent previous years, which I guess is the same thing. I wish I didn't want it so bad. I wish I could just quit. I wish I could just not want it, because when I say like, I'm done with this baloney, I can't do this anymore, he'll go, okay, well, I'll just give you a couple of days and see how you feel.
It
And then
doesn't last long,
2 days
right?
later, I'm like, I'm getting up, I'm getting back to this script. I'm calling this person. I'm going to get this movie made,
Right.
I think, yeah. So anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, but, yeah.
I mean, you
If
have
I
to
answered that.
it's not just having the motivation and the willingness to work hard, but it's the grit that makes you get up when you've
That's
been
right.
knocked down,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
And and it's interesting you bring up like who's going to give you a helping hand, and sometimes it's a man, sometimes it's a woman, and sometimes people who say no are men or women, and I think there's that unconscious bias in there where men and women can hold that against you.
Yes.
um and I've also seen sometimes in these more male dominated fields that you can't just count on somebody because they're female as a
No.
mentor, as somebody who's going to give you a green light. And sometimes you even see like kind of that token female syndrome, right? Where there are women out there who don't want to help other women just because
No.
they're like, well, I'm here and this is my space, and I kind of like being the only one.
Well, and
Have
I
you
will
seen that?
say, to me, that's the greatest crime against women, against women. I mean, there's lots of other ones, but for me, if we're
Sure.
talking professionally, and I have a business partner, she's a producing partner of mine. She and I have come up against this a lot, where,
Hmm.
we have connections and we have access to women in power. But for whatever reason, there is they don't believe you can do it. And you can't, and it's hard to explain what that is. And I'm not on the inside of, I'm not in their minds. I can't understand it. But that's the piece that makes you want to give up, because you
Yeah.
think, it's not the men, because God, I love men, God bless men, but I expect it from men. I
Yeah.
expect to be taught, I expect a man to say, okay, well, gosh, you're so lovely, but you're a mom and you're in your, you're sort of in your, I'm in my late 40s, you're in your late 40s, but, you've made these, two relatively good movies, but, we're looking for somebody that like is, 28 and he's a guy, and they're looking for a specific kind of filmmaker they can write a story about. Nobody wants to write a story
Right.
about a 47-year-old mother of two who lives in Houston. There's nothing like, sexy about this story. So it does become less about what you can do and and it becomes about who you are. And if you don't have an advocate, and specifically a woman in your age group, or who understands what you're capable of, or who can recognize it, you're sort of like, you're just out in the cold. That's the heartbreaker for me, is the women who won't help women. And that's something that, I know I'll never be guilty of, because I give everybody all the information at any given time. And I I will never not answer a question. I will never not try to help somebody. I will never not introduce somebody because I'm afraid it won't get me further down the road. And I think that's another piece, is there's a lot of women in power that could just make introductions, and
Right.
that's all they would need to do, and they don't do that either. So I don't understand it. I really don't. It's really disappointing. But I think that's a phenomenon in with women in business and in
Right.
specifically the film industry too.
It's a culture, it's a pretty big cultural shift that would have to take place, I
I think
think.
so. Yeah. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
guess it's based in fear, right? It is that, like, they
Right.
got to that point. They don't want to let go. What if they do recommend somebody and that somebody doesn't perform? How will it reflect on them? They want to go with the sure thing, right? So
Yeah.
it's just such a killer as far as how you how you perceive yourself succeeding. Like, it can't be only about hard work, which is sad.
Right. So then on the flip side of that, I agree. It's heartbreaking. On the flip side of that though, who has been your biggest cheerleader in business? And we know
Yeah.
that obviously you have your social supports and your
Right.
familial and relationship supports, but in your business, who has truly been there for you?
Well, I have to say, there have been a couple. I mean, like, I have been very lucky, because, well, I'll talk about women first, and then I'll tell you about the men, because there are men that have said yes and
Yeah.
really changed my life, which has been incredible. Um, but the two women that I can really specifically point to, one is my producing partner, Bridget Stokes. She's also a director. She's an excellent producer and an excellent director. And she and I have been working together for many, many years. And we're great sounding boards for each other. I've produced her work. She's produced my work. She believes in what I'm capable of, and I believe in what she's capable of. And it's just that. And we're very close as friends, but we're like sisters. We do argue. Our sensibilities are different, which helps because it grows kind of the creative process for us. The other person that I really feel very strongly about, and I don't even know if I've ever told her this, is my casting director that I've worked with on my first feature and the feature I just cast and a feature I worked on last year. Her name is Rory Bergman. This woman, you know, we didn't pay her until after we had funding, and she was helping us cast the movie for free because she believed in us and believed in the movie. And so I don't know people like that in the movie business. She's maybe one in a trillion that comes to a project and says, I'm moved by this. I love the writing. I can help you get this done. And here's how. And she put
That's
herself,
awesome.
it's amazing. She's an amazing human being. And she put herself on the line over and over again. Luckily, it all worked out and she did get paid and she got credit
Yeah.
and we got the movies made. But I mean,
Right.
she really went, she really took a risk to work on these things. Without any sense of it ever going. So that's just an incredible, there's such a generosity in that you don't find in the movie business. And so I owe her so much. I owe her everything because she really pieced the movies together. The other thing I would say is the actors, the actresses who said yes to these parts that I've in the movies that I have made. If these first actors, my first feature is a movie called The Volunteer, and Anjanou Ellis is this incredible actress, and she's been in everything. And if you see her, you'll know who she is, but her name doesn't ring a bell for many people. But she said yes, and that yes changed the course of my life. And then other actors came on board because she was on board, because she's so well respected. The same is true for The Lost Husband, the movie it's coming out tomorrow, April 10th. And I know this will air later, but you can still rent it now in May or whatever month this podcast will air.
Hmm.
Leslie Bibb said yes. And then her yes turned into everybody else's yes. So those yeses, people don't understand how significant saying yes is to somebody who has something good, who's showing you something good. Just take the chance. It's so important. And then I have to say, the financiers of these movies are men, honestly. I mean, for better or worse, they're men. And they read the scripts and were moved by the scripts and wrote checks and have supported these movies in a way that, it's unimaginable to me that it happened. And it was, they're two of my greatest champions, these two investors, and want to work with me again and again and again because they believe in what I'm doing. Now, will they recoup their money? Gosh, I hope so. But
Right.
it sort of doesn't matter to them because they believe in me and they believe in the project. So,
Right.
and that's just
Like
sort of shocking to me, but also amazing and wonderful
Like your
in the best
casting
way.
director
Exactly.
did
Somebody
it
who can
why
see
because she believed
something.
it.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, by sort of association, by having this validation from these people, from these women and these men, you it sort of like validates what you're doing, and it says to you, you're doing something right, because people with some power believe in you and see that you can do
Mhm.
something. And so I know we wake up in the morning and we do the things we do because we have to, but to get somebody that says, I'm going to write you a check to make sure that happens, that just really makes you want to keep doing it. So there's something very I don't know, emboldening about being believed in, even if it's by 4 people. It's enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a similar experience trying to get this podcast going, and
Hmm.
I got in touch with you because of a friend who saw a tweet that I put out on Twitter. And in doing so, it was almost like I created this social contract that I
Yes,
had to push
you had
forward.
to
But
do it.
like seeing and hearing all these people say, hey, I know somebody who can be on your podcast, or I know the perfect person, I'm going to introduce you, or just all the people who said, I can't wait to hear it. And I mean, that made me keep going.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's really powerful.
Yeah, I like the idea. I like what you said about the social contract, because I do think once you have sort of signed that contract with
Hmm.
others, you are compelled, whether you want to or not. You must then decide,
Yeah,
okay, am I going to like put up or shut up? Am I going to sit here and say like I have all these fanciful ideas and dreams, or am I actually going to show people that I'm capable? And so I do
right.
think it's powerful, a social
It
contract.
is
So yeah.
powerful. I actually didn't really tell many people until I kind
Mhm.
of just on a whim put the tweet out, because I'm like, oh, maybe I can kind of crowdsource for guests on the show. And then after I did it, I was like, oh shit, now I got to I
Now
got to
you have
do
to do
this.
it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Yes. Oh,
Exactly.
I love it.
I'd like to ask you, of all the different things that you've done, which project of yours really just is the most meaningful one? And not to diminish any of the others, but I mean,
Sure.
which one makes you say, gosh, this is like my baby?
Well, it's hard because you write these things and you get them into the world, and they're like, your grown-up children. They're finally,
Yeah.
going off to college, and they're going to make their way in the world. They've graduated from college. Um, you know, I think you're kind of like the one that you're closest to is always going to be, for me, like the one I just finished is always going to be the one that's going to feel most significant. And The Lost Husband, I optioned that novel. It was a novel by Catherine Center, who's a Texas author who's really very successful. She's a New York Times bestseller list maybe 2 times or 3 times over. This book was maybe her 4th book, and I read it about 5 years ago and absolutely adored it, and finished it and thought, I know this story, I can make this story, I know what this Texas is, because it's all based in Texas. And the Texas is really a character in the film, because it's my love letter, really, honestly, to Texas. Because moving here as a 12-year-old, initially I was like, I got to get back to Ireland as fast as possible. But
Right.
after being here for many, many years, you kind of you become Texan, you fall in love with Texas. And a lot of people don't know Texas and have these preconceived notions of Texas. It's
Hmm.
not what you think. I'll just say, it's not what you think. Come to Texas. It's not what you think, especially Houston. It's so diverse and wonderful. Um,
Yeah.
but I ended up spending 5 years with this project, not knowing if it was going to be made or not. And, we cast, and then we had to recast, and we had money, and then the money went away. And, there was a lot of pressure because in the community, the author lives in the same community I live in. And we all know a lot of like ladies in the community, and all our kids go to the same schools. And, there's a lot of, cross-pollination happening. And it
Hmm.
was really hard over some of those years because people would approach me randomly and be like, aren't you the lady doing that movie? And I was like, I am that lady. And they would say, and when is that going to happen? Is that going to happen? Like, and the
Right.
skepticism was just so immense and intense and
Yeah.
all consuming at times. And there were moments where I said to myself, gosh, I don't know if I can actually get this done. Or if I do get it done, I have to like, really take it down and make it a much smaller movie than I wanted to. Um, when you make a movie, a lot of times almost every time, depending on what kind of filmmaker you are, you really should consider, or you have to consider your cast, right? You have to, if you want your movie to be seen by many people, you have to make it sort of commercially viable. Now, there are
Mhm.
filmmakers, and I respect them greatly, who don't believe that. But me personally, I believe I don't make movies for me, for my private collection. I want people to see my films. And so I
Right.
make films that I think people will want to see. Um, and so The Lost Husband is one of those films. And for better or worse, it's a romantic drama. You know, and there's lots of comedic elements in it. And I think it's a lovely movie and it's a great adaptation. Not everyone's going to feel that way, but in order for me to have gotten it made, I needed a movie star. So I had to wait until I had the funding to pay for that movie star. So it took a really long time. So that this little baby that is, out this year is really this is the one that's been, I said to my husband a year ago before we started shooting, I said, if I can just get this movie made, I'm done. I'm going to quit. I'm not going to need to do this anymore. And in the meantime, I've written another movie. I'm trying to get it set up in Ireland and in New York. And so it's like this constant, you're on the wheel and you're putting yourself on the
Yeah.
wheel for better or worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe for better. I don't know.
Well, I can't wait to see it. I'm excited. I think it would be remiss I would be remiss in the topics that we're talking about if we didn't talk about one of the projects you were involved with, which was the Apache 8. I
Mhm.
introduced it in my intro of you, and it just is such an amazing story. Can you tell me a little bit more about
Sure.
bringing that project to fruition?
Sure. So I was working at the time for a distribution company in New York City called Artistic License Films, and it was owned and run by this dynamo of a woman. Her name is Sandy Zeig. And Sandy was a tortured filmmaker at heart. She loved distribution, and we worked side by side in this company for many years. But she always wanted to make films, and she loved a documentary. And so she was walking through the airport in Arizona. I think she might have been in Tucson, and she saw all these women in like this crowd, and they all had firefighter gear with them. And she said she just was so like struck by the strength of these women and how they were all standing there laughing and talking to each other in this camaraderie, that she approached them and said, could you guys tell me what you're doing? Like, what are you? And they said, well, we are firefighters, and we're heading to they were at that point they were heading to they were in Arizona. They were heading to northern Arizona to fight a fire that was over something like, I don't know, something like 100,000 acres or something. And it was an all women. They're the first all women firefighting team, and they're all Apache ladies. And the movie is excellent because the movie not only deals with the firefighting and the physicality of it, it
Mhm.
also deals with these women's private lives and how each
Mhm.
of them is, they all live on the reservation. So there's the aspect of life on the reservation, life going away from their families and their small children while they fight fires, life, up against the male firefighters who are, there's a little bit of a competition there between the men and the women. Um,
Mhm.
but these women are outrageous, and they're for better or worse, I mean, I keep saying for better or worse, for better, they're stronger than the men, and
Yeah.
they walk, like they can walk further, they can work longer hours. They are amazing, these women. So that's where that movie came from. And Sandy directed that movie. So she saw them in the airport, she felt compelled to find out what their story was, and she started shooting the film. And it's a beautiful story. It really is. It's a great movie. And it was, we sold that movie to PBS, and it was on rotation on PBS for years. So, and you could
I
rent it.
I love how you can look at this woman in their role as a firefighter. Obviously, not a lot of women in there, and think, "Ooh, she is just such a badass." But then you kind of look at their personal lives where they are moms and they have different interests, and I think a lot of times when you look at women in these male-dominated fields, as an aside, I'll say that sometimes I'll get a comment. I'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm an orthopedic surgeon," and I'll get a comment, "Well, you don't look like
Right.
one," or because I'm in my heels, and
Yeah.
or I'm getting my hair colored, or
Right.
doing things that are traditionally thought of as girly, and I think about and write about sometimes how we need to have no apologies for who
Yep.
we are
Yep.
and where we fall on that masculine to feminine spectrum, and that we can have qualities from kind of all different spots along that spectrum and still be really good at what we do. We can be
Yep.
good surgeons and filmmakers and firefighters, even if we like to have our nails done. It doesn't
Right.
matter.
No, it doesn't matter. Well, I often find it fascinating that, vanity, maybe it's not vanity, but it's some version of, being attractive or looking pretty or whatever that is, that somehow works against us. You know,
Hmm.
I think a great, the women that I know that are really brilliant and really beautiful are never taken for their brilliance. They're always taken for their beauty. There's always an expectation of something else from them, but it all
Hmm.
has to do with how beautiful they are. So I hate that we can't just be equal. And I don't know when that's going to be. I actually heard, I actually do know when that's going to be, because Ann Curry told me at I went to see Ann Curry speak recently, before the coronavirus pandemic really kicked into major quarantine. She spoke about a week before that everything happened here in Houston, and she had read an article in the Wall Street Journal, and she said it said in 157 years, men and women will be treated equally. It'll take that long. It'll take another 157 years for a woman in the same position
Wow.
as a man to be paid the same, and to be judged on merit and not because
Right.
we're women. And so that's really tough. That's really
Yeah.
and I have two girls, and to think about them in that position is really hard,
Hmm.
you know.
That's
And
many generations
it's
away.
awful. It's absolutely terrible. And
Yeah.
and it's funny being on set too, because as a female director on set, you really are surrounded by most, like my business partner and I, we do our best to hire women, and make the set as diverse as possible. But there's still a lot of guys on set. Like it is mostly guys, because there are many times you don't have enough women to draw from in certain grip, gaffer, cinematographers. There's like 2% that worked last
Hmm.
year out of the 100% that are that exist. 2% are women working.
Hmm.
Um, the numbers are really low. So, and you're on set and you're thinking, I was never thinking about what I looked like, but there were times that I knew other people were thinking about it, which I think
Yeah.
is so funny. And there's like tons of photos. We had an on-set photographer, and you go through the photos, and there's a lot of moments that I'm like, looking like kind of crazy, and my face is all contorted. And you have, the beautiful actresses next to me, and like the beautiful lead next to me, and I'm like this monster. But and what I think people, and when I look at that, I'm like, that's not the greatest shot of me. But I'm the boss on that. Like, I can't be looking pretty. I can't have my, like, it's, that to me is such a confusing paradigm. How do you like, justify any kind of vanity as the boss? Or how do you, and why shouldn't we be able to? There's so many different, that's a really complex,
Right.
you
It's
know
hard to even wrap our heads around it
it's
fully
so
and
hard.
understand it.
Yes.
Yeah, it really
Yeah.
is hard.
Yeah.
Well, if you had one piece of advice for a woman who either wanted to get into your field, which is very male dominated, um, or just in general, what would that piece of advice be?
I would just say what somebody said to me many, 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 many years ago. Just do it. Just try and do it. Just, if you're a writer, write. If you want to be a filmmaker, you have this little wonderful device called a cell phone, and you can start shooting movies on it immediately. Um, there's a lot of avenues to express yourself when you want to be a filmmaker. And that could be anything from, your own Vimeo channel to
Hmm.
a film festival. You can submit anything you want to a film festival, a short film. You can, and lots of people are doing that with their phones. And even,
Wow.
really, really accomplished filmmakers are shooting, these kind of vanity projects with their phones that are actually quite brilliant, and submitting them to festivals and getting distribution. Um, I think everyone should be doing something creative. One of the best pieces of advice I got from my cousin, who's a physicist. I was very ill for about a year and a half, 2 years. And my cousin said to me, what you have to do is wake up and do something creative every day, and do it out of your comfort zone. So I started to
Right.
paint. I'm not a painter, but I started to just paint and do fun things with paintings and make more, little videos and films. And it really did get me up and get my head out of sort of the illness I was in. So
And now you're a painter.
I'm definitely not a painter.
No, you have to
I
say,
am
well, I am a painter now.
well, I mean, I do still paint, but I usually just
Yeah.
then paint over that and then paint another one and then paint over that. So I just do it it's kind of a catharsis. It's like
Right.
meditation.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I would just say my best advice is just do it. Don't expect, one of the great, um, I think failures that I experience every day is that I expect an audience. I expect there to be somebody who is interested in what I'm doing, and there isn't. Occasionally, once every 2 years, someone wants to see a movie that I made, or because I've just made the movie. It took me that long to make the movie, or most of the time, nobody wants to read a script. Who wants to do that? Like, it's not a thing. So your expectations are really what drive you, I think. And so mine are also what torture me. I want to have an audience for the work I'm doing. If I can forget that, I'm really happy. If I can forget about people, seeing one of my films, and or if I can forget about people not seeing my films, I can then feel better. If I could just make the films, put them into the world and hope,
Hmm.
I would feel great. But I think expectation kills us a little bit. So if
Yeah.
we can just go into things being happy doing them, and just for the sake of doing them, you would be so much more fulfilling. I'm still working on that.
I think we all are. That's
Yeah,
true.
that's a
Well,
hard one.
that's really good advice. If our listeners want to keep up with what you're doing and learn more about you and your work, where can they go online to do that?
Well, I have an Instagram. I'm not really on social media except for Instagram, and I do post mostly professional stuff on there about my projects. And so my handle is at Vick VICK 2222. Not very creative, I know. I think I was an early person on Instagram and got that wrong. And so that's my Instagram. And then on IMDb, if you look me up, you can see my projects coming up in the future. Hopefully I'll be getting something off the ground next year. This year's kind of over.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's sort of where you can find out what I'm doing. And then The Lost Husband would be my most recent film. And it has wonderful Josh Duhamel and Leslie Bibb and Nora Dunn and other fabulous actors in it. So I hope everybody sees that. It's really uplifting and fun, and it's a love story. So who doesn't like a
I
love
can't,
story?
I can't wait. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. I was very excited to have you on, and I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Nancy. I loved it.
Thanks. Yay!
Yay. Okay. I feel
Thank
like I was
you.
brambly.
No, not at all. No, it was
Woo.
awesome. I just personally love listening to you. And it's so interesting to hear about your path and then just kind of get a peek into your work and your life, which I'm so far removed from,
Yeah,
being in
yeah.
medicine. And so I find it very cool and very
Okay.
interesting. I know that, Rob had told me that there was going to be the big premiere and it was,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
what did you end up doing to pivot? How,
Well, so
how did it change for you?
well, we were booked in movie theaters, and it was going to be we were going to do a premiere in LA, and it was a red carpet and the whole thing, but that all went
Yeah.
to hell. But and that's okay. That
Yeah.
happens. Basically, we did this great big online push, and the distributor is being very positive about everybody being home and quarantine and all that fun stuff.
Mhm.
So I think that it will be something people will potentially watch over this weekend and for weeks to come. It is number 2 right now in the pre-orders on Apple, which is really
Sweet.
spectacular. I know,
That's
it's surprising.
awesome.
But I think it's a family movie, so I think a lot of people will be able to watch it with their, kids and parents and not feel weird or, embarrassed about anything. It's very clean. But yeah, it was a
Great.
little, it's one of those things, you work so hard and you have this, it's again, expectation. You have this expectation about how it's going to be. And then when it sort
Yeah.
of doesn't work out, you have to grieve it very quickly and say, thank God I have my health, and move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And
That's
then
all
you
you can
pivot.
do. You
And then you
pivot.
pivot.
I mean,
Yeah.
life is it's all about assimilating to the new, ever changing, world.
Yeah.
So that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
That's what we have to
Yeah.
do. What are you going to
Well,
do?
I know you have some meetings, and so I
Yeah.
don't want to keep you, and I really, really appreciate your time. If you think of anybody who might be a good
Yeah.
guest on the podcast, please let
Yep.
me know.
Okay. I will.
If you have any connections to one of the lady firefighters, I would love to
Yeah.
talk to them,
I can definitely
or
ask
anyone you think of.
Sandy. Yeah. Well, I can also, I don't know if it'll be too close to this, to The Lost Husband, but I could also put you in touch with Catherine Center, who is
Okay.
the author. And she's got, you know,
Oh, that would be cool.
she has her past two books were New York Times bestsellers, and she's about to come out with another one, which I know will be a New York Times bestseller as well.
Yeah.
But she writes very specific, they're love stories, and she's all about love, which is really interesting. Her kind of whole thing is about things working out and love.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a very uplifting message there. But I will definitely, I can introduce you guys for
Thank
sure.
you.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
All right. Great to
stay
meet you.
safe. It was so nice to meet you too. And stay healthy, stay
You
sane.
too. You too. You too.
Don't
And
beat
have,
yourself up for that second, third glass of wine
no,
because I'm not.
don't worry. I never do.
All right. Have a
Great to
great
meet you.
one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye,
Take
Nancy.
care.
Okay. You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.
Bye.